Welcome back to the Unscripted Pharmacist podcast for part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Anthony Chaffee. In this episode, we continue exploring the science behind optimal nutrition, as well as the misconceptions about plant-based diets, as well as the impact of the carnivore diet on health and longevity, because that's what it's all about, right? Dr. Chaffee shares some deeper insights into disease prevention, metabolic health, and performance optimization. If you thought part 1 was interesting and eye-opening, I can't wait for part 2. Let's dive in. This should be fun. Let's get the real data on the vaccine. What is the actual increase in autism rates? What's the actual increase for some sort of injury? And do parents, and most importantly, does the physician know that? And where did he get that information? Total transparency in medicine is critical. And I think now what we're going through with Doge and everything is we're going to have total transparency from here forward. And we're going to know everything. So. And I think that everyone should know and should do their homework, because you can go to Open Secrets. You can go find out where your politician got his money, what year, who was it from. Same thing with Open Payments. You can find out where your doctor got his money. So when I started looking at the ADA, and I've looked at other, wait a minute, this study doesn't sound right? This study is an anti-meat study, for example. Okay, Loma Linda. Okay, well, there you go. You know what I mean? It's right off the bat. So when you start doing a little bit of researching and you kind of go, okay, there's conflicts here. Well, if there's any conflict, I don't know what it did. I don't know how much it changed how you behaved or how you favored one thing over another. I couldn't tell by looking at somebody going, how much of an influence was this $10,000 or whatever that money was that you received from Big Pharma? How did it affect you? You've got this USDA dietary guidelines coming up in 2025, and I think 9 out of 20, have admitted that they have conflicts. I think there's more that haven't even disclosed their conflicts. Why are we letting these people, we're so desperate for the so-called experts to weigh in and nobody else can look at this data? Why do we have to have anyone with conflicts? It's almost like you're going to have to change science to the point where it's okay, here's a drug. This independent company will evaluate it. And there's no incentive if it's accepted and put in the market, or is it going to get rejected? It shouldn't be up to really anybody. It should be a fair evaluation, non-biased third-party evaluation, and give us the real data. Not just sending FDA safety reports, right? So for a new drug application, there's so much wrong with this system that's inherent, that is broken. And I'm hoping that we're going to fix this soon, because the kids are dying. I think if the kids get healthy, then we'll get healthier. People will start moving. Chronic disease will disappear, and I'll be out of job.
Good.
What the heck? Right?
That'd be great.
I'll be out of job. Yeah. What are pharmacists going to do?
Yeah. Well, the thing, look, go back to doing what they were doing, in the 1800s, things like that. Do we need as many of them? No, we're not going to. Will we need as many doctors? No, we won't. No.
Right.
Good. Then we'll have an abundance and people actually get healthy, and it's just it's. But, I think that that's a good thing. I think that's a positive direction to go in, not needing as many doctors, not needing this massively bloated, multi-trillion-dollar healthcare infrastructure that we have, because we have to have it because everyone is so sick. I think that there was actually 19 out of 20 of those advisors actually were.
Was it 19?
19.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
One or two guys that didn't.
But they didn't. I don't think all of them had to admit their conflicts.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
and Fatima Stanford's on there. Fatima Stanford. She was on 60 Minutes.
Yeah. Right.
Remember her? He got up there.
Yeah, the obesity is genetic. Yeah.
You just took $34,000 from Ozempic company. Come on.
Well, and this is why isn't that telegraphed? Well, why the reason is it's not going to be shown on the news because the news was paid by the manufacturers of, whatever to get these people on there. I went to people, I went to medical school with doctors who are now doctors. I talk to them all the time. And my buddy's sends me this clip. My roommate from medical school is, Yale trained radiologist and interventional radiologist. And he's just like, and he's doing something else now, sort of like vascular, with varicose veins injections and things like
Okay,
that,
yeah.
getting rid of that. And so
Sclerotherapy.
he was on this little sort of morning talk show sort of thing, going, "Oh yeah, oh, here you go." Blah, blah, blah. I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." How'd that come about? He's like, "The company just set it up. They just want to promote it. They want to promote the product. They want to promote, this technique." And so they paid to have me go on as a guest and promote this product. That I guarantee you, that's what Ozempic lady did. Is that she was being paid by them to do this spot, and the news organizations with 60 Minutes or whatever, they were paid to have her on there. I don't think that was an organic thing. It almost never is
Right.
in the media
I thought,
now.
60 Minutes didn't do their homework on her. That's kind of
Oh
crazy.
no, they did.
Here's the
Yeah,
website. I'm like,
no,
no, that was intentional.
yeah,
Any news media that advertises for big pharma, that's the narrative. They're not
yeah,
there to advertise to you, the consumer. This is like,
no,
would you give somebody $10 million for advertising? You got to give them some sort of slot, but you're making sure for that $10 million that they continue the narrative, which is exactly what we're kind of anti, which is
yeah,
everybody's anti-meat. They're
yeah.
anti-carnivore. I get so
I
much
wonder
grief
why.
about this.
Mm,
Yeah, because it just happens to heal everybody naturally.
mm,
Hey,
yeah.
what's your feeling on the microbiome? Because I have a very
Well,
different opinion that I
yeah.
need fiber and plants. What's
Yeah,
your
no,
feeling?
well, yeah, well, you certainly don't. I mean, there's plenty of people that go from like clean ketogenic diets,
Yeah,
eating meat, but also eating a lot of fibrous plants.
right,
And Ben Azadi did one recently. He's been clean keto for freaking over a decade, right?
right.
Super healthy, just doing everything, really great. Uh, but having a lot of whole fruits and vegetables with a lot of fiber. So he checked his
Mhm.
microbiome, and a lot of people are doing this as well. And they check their microbiome, and on his clean keto, high fiber diet or decent fiber diet. I don't know exactly what he was eating, but fiber anyway. He said it was okay. It wasn't great,
I did
but
that.
it was
I did
okay.
that for a long time too.
Yeah,
Yep, like 10
yeah.
years, and
And then
it wasn't
yeah,
great.
and no, and the recommendation was you need to eat a lot more leafy greens, fruits and vegetables,
Oh,
get more
roughage.
fiber, and stay away from red meat, and this will improve your microbiome. And he said, so I did the exact opposite of that. I took out all the fiber in plants and basically only ate red meat for 3 months. And at the end of it, he said he had an exemplary microbiome study, and he actually had something like 6 or 8 new species that
Oh,
didn't they weren't even there before. He's like, well, where the hell did those come from? I think it comes from your oral biome because your oral biome is going to change as well. And then, every bite of food that you chew up, some of those bacteria getting in there and, go down like a Trojan horse. Maybe some of
that's
those get through.
interesting.
And so that
Okay,
would be my guess in that one because he wasn't like taking probiotics or anything like that. He was just eating meat and that was it.
right,
And we're seeing a lot of that. And then yeah, they've done studies with the Inuit when they're eating their traditional diet, and they have extremely healthy and diverse
right,
microbiome. So
with no
you
fiber.
you yeah, exactly. No fiber. And so, can you have a healthy microbiome doing something else as well? Sure. People do it.
Right,
But that doesn't mean that you have to do that, that only fiber is
right,
going to get you there. And you can't do it with meat, and meat makes it worse. It doesn't. And,
right. I
and,
spent I spent 50 years figuring that out. I
yeah,
Oh yeah. So I
yeah.
it took me a lot. I don't know why I couldn't figure it out because I don't know why fiber wants to rush through my body like it's a toxin, but it does,
Because it is.
right? And I did that for 50 years, and then
Yeah.
and then I listened to plants are trying to kill you. Brussels sprouts have
Nice.
130 known carcinogens. Like,
Mhm.
thank you, because that was like, hey, I finally I'm finally normal. I
Mm,
If we sat down and had dinner and had a salad, I was already in the bathroom before the main dish came. It was
right.
like toxic. And I
Mm,
couldn't put it together. I don't know why, but I did this
yeah.
for 50 years. It was slow for several days. And then it was like, oh my gosh, I had my shitty day. Right. And then, but just how many people are doing this constantly and they are too afraid to even try the alternative. So, what arguments do you use to try to convince people, because I used to work in this diabetes clinic, and I would get in there and I'd try to convince them that they needed me to monitor their blood glucose with the CGM. So we're giving out continuous glucose monitors for patients, and I'd track them. But I'd like, hey, let me convince you that you need to do a low carb, ketogenic, and maybe a carnivore diet. So I have like 20 minutes with them. I got this rant going. I would do this in COVID patients in the rooms. You're wearing that COVID mask and you're sweating like crazy, trying to explain to people, hey, the reason why you need to change your diet is this. What are some of the really good arguments that you use to convince somebody? Because oftentimes you don't have much time with the patient and they're diabetic, and you're like, hey, I can't tell you to do a balance and avoid these and get. I found that the easiest way is to say, don't eat anything that doesn't come from an animal. So that really kind of eliminates. And they start asking me like, oh, what about cottage cheese? Like, well, does it come from animal? Okay, this is really simple. Anyone can catch on to this.
Yeah.
So what arguments do you use? What are your most convincing arguments? Almost like David Letterman's top 10 reasons to switch to a carnivore diet for the month of March, a mini March month. I don't know.
Well, I think you can certainly hone this in from like a specific angle of like if the patients have like a certain issue, like so diabetes, right?
Right.
You just talk to them and just say, hey, listen, you have this diabetes is a consequence of hyperglycemia. I explained to them about how toxic, glycation is. Excessive blood sugar leads to excessive glycation. That you have about 4 grams of glucose throughout your entire circulatory system at any given time with normal blood sugar levels, and that those 4 grams is sufficient for every single chemical process in your entire body and your brain, and in your entire body and brain. And 1 extra gram of glucose is actually toxic to the body. That's diabetes. And your body responds to it as a toxin by trying to detoxify it by elevating your insulin to try to lower your blood sugar. Right. And the reason being is that glucose, hold on one second. Well, what's going on? Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. All right. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So where was I? So if you take in these exogenous carbohydrates, those glucose molecules, any carbohydrate molecules, can physically fuse to other molecules called glycation. So you get this buildup of this damage. It's permanent damage. It's irreversible, and you have to just get rid of these molecules and take them out. But you can build up this damage, especially in your vasculature and your arteries, capillaries, etc. Damages the arteries. There's a massive increased association with cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And I believe for that reason. So, your high blood sugar is damaging things. They're physically fusing, they're damaging it, and you get these advanced glycation end products, AGEs, and they literally age you. And so you're getting all the damage and consequences and side effects of having diabetes, complications of having diabetes really come from elevated blood sugar. It destroys your vasculature, knocks off the blood supply to your different organs and your toes rot off and you have to get them cut off, and your feet get cut off. Then you get your legs amputated. Right. Destroys
you don't feel it. Yeah.
Destroys the blood supply to the small sort of little capillaries in your kidneys. Start getting renal failure. The number one cause of renal failure is diabetes. Damages your retina. You get diabetic retinopathy. You go blind. You just wake up in the morning and you're blind. Alzheimer's is being called type 3 diabetes. PCOS is type 4 diabetes. You get atherosclerosis, and then eventually you just die because you're just you have nothing else left to do, and that all is a consequence of 1 extra gram of carbohydrates in your blood, and yet we are eating hundreds and hundreds of grams of carbohydrates a day, and your body is losing its mind, going like, how the hell am I supposed to deal with this? And so even when you are capable of getting your blood sugar back down, which doesn't last forever, that's what diabetes is. When it's uncontrollable, you can't keep it below that certain level.
Yeah.
Now it's 5 grams all the time, but you'll have way more than that. You have this massive big spike, and then it'll come back down to normal. Right. And then you have a spike and it comes back to normal. So that's area under the curve. You're getting that area under the curve. That's damage that builds up over time. It's called the Maillard reaction, this glycative effect.
Right.
And Carbohydrates
What
bind to
kind of
something. We see this in browning when we're cooking
right,
something, we cook meat or something like that, has this browning to it. That's that Maillard reaction. And so we see this, when I'm operating on a kid, there's a phrase like, "Oh, it's bone white," because bones used to be white, and so when you're
right,
operating on a kid and opening up its skull, it is bleach white. So
right?
it is actually like
Really?
bone white, white. It's just startlingly white. You get to an adult, and there's a bit of a sort of a cream sort of tinge to it.
I,
There's
I
just a
don't
bit of an
know.
off-white sort of look. Yeah, well,
Next
there
time I
is.
gash my head, I'm gonna
Yeah,
take a photo.
just take a look. Yeah, just wipe the blood off and then take a look.
That's right.
And
It's kind of like an off white, like an ivory color, or would you say
yeah,
it's a cream
it starts
color?
becoming more of an ivory. Yeah,
Yeah,
and then when you
beige.
get a lot older, it can get darker still. And then when you see like people that like been long term drinkers,
Yeah,
smokers, not taking care of themselves, it actually has like a brown tinge to it. And
really.
so that's that browning. So there and so that's happening in
Even
your bones. That's
darker,
happening
huh?
to all your whole body. That's going on everything. And so anyways, we see that, so that's what's happening. And that just comes from glucose. So, diabetes, we've been shown, with Virta Health, that you can reverse type 2 diabetes with a high fat, meat based ketogenic diet. You get rid of carbs, you get rid of processed foods, you just eat mostly
Right.
fatty meat, have some veggies if are a masochist, and then, and you're good. Right. And you just point that out to people, and they're just like, yeah, I don't want that anywhere near my body.
Yeah.
And
See,
so
that's where I feel
that's
like they need to see it. They gotta like if I mention a food, I want
Mhm.
the smart, successful patient to go, yeah, I don't eat that. Not because so and so told me, like, no, I've seen the graph. That thing
Mhm.
spikes me. And I know that every time I spike, I increase my risk for cardiovascular disease. How many people need to understand that the A1C is worthless information? It literally is, it's garbage. You got to know what your insulin is. You need to know what your
Yeah.
glucose variability is. You need a lot more data than just focusing on a 3 month average.
Mm.
I feel like
Yeah.
there's so much more. I want this data in as many arms as possible. I want this new knowledge of what was really going on with our food and lifestyle and how it's affecting our health, because I've seen the graph. I know the graph.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I mean,
HbA1c is
that's
a very
probably a big,
blunt instrument. Yeah.
what's that?
I was saying
A1C is
A1C is, yeah, it's a very blunt instrument, and so,
it's an
if you
average when you're
yeah.
bouncing all over, but you're
Mm.
going to draw a straight line. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
How long
But,
have we been using that? Since the 50s? I don't know how long that's been out.
oh, I
It's
don't
been
know exactly
forever,
when it
huh?
came in, but yeah.
Glucose,
But
I
yeah.
kind of think of like science as like it's only progressed that like we could measure cholesterol, we could measure glucose. We couldn't measure insulin forever. That
Yeah,
was
we didn't even
hard.
know about it.
We
Yeah.
didn't even know. Like, and to be able
Yeah.
to isolate it, oh my gosh. We could put it in a
Mm.
vial, from a dog, right? The
Mm.
pancreas of a dog. How many
Mm.
people realize that most people would not react to beef insulin? Like how much beef insulin do you think we could get for cheap? Pennies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And very few people would react to it. But instead we use this human recombinant because it's patentable and it's so marketable. Like why aren't we using something that's less expensive, especially for type 1s that actually need it? That's the only people that need the insulin. Let's be honest.
Mm.
Like everybody else, no, you have the opposite. You have the same problem of high glucose, but you have, essentially the completely different. One has a low insulin, the other one has excessively high insulin because it's been elevated for so long.
Mhm.
You know, uh,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
crazy.
so it's a backwards system, but it sells vials of insulin, and yeah,
What other arguments do you use? Because I've convinced people with a couple of nice little things that I picked up here and there. I talk about
Mhm.
how the colon has gotten smaller, not
Mhm.
bigger, right? I talk about cows having four stomachs. The small intestine is
Mhm.
being the surface area of a tennis court. Why is
Mhm.
that? You know,
Mhm.
why does when you eat meat, your GI tract slows down so we can digest all of it over time, nice and slowly, because it wants to get all
Mhm.
of it, right? And what does Ozempic do? Slows down the digestion so you can feel full for a long period of time, right? And
Mhm.
why how in the world could man ever be dependent upon a plant
Mhm.
for our existence? We're white.
Well, and
We live
yeah,
40 degrees north.
yeah. What and one plant across 6 continents that people
Oh,
live on, and
different
and yeah,
climates.
we had to have this plant. Well, these plants are the ones. These plants are all the plants that we eat. I mean, they've been grouped and taken from all different sorts of continents, and so those people on those continents before we had intercontinental travel,
Right.
they would have had to been eating something else, right? They couldn't have been eating, the nightshades, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers that came from the New World to Europe,
Right.
500 years ago, right? So if you those are required and you have to have them,
Right.
then why didn't people in Ireland
You
have
should
to
have
have
died.
potatoes prior to
Right.
that?
Right.
In before the 1500s. So it doesn't stack. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of different reasons, different sort of arguments you can make. I always try to position it in the view of that individual patient. And so if I'm looking through their bloods and their insulin's through the roof, and their leptin's up, and their blood sugar's spiked, and they have all these other sorts of problems, their estrogens being suppressed, or their testosterone is being suppressed, or growth hormones being suppressed, all these other sorts of things, I can make that argument and say, listen, this is why sugar is so bad. And then in response to that, your body raises insulin because it's desperately trying to stop all this damage from happening. But insulin affects hundreds of different processes in your
Yeah.
body. Like, it suppresses estrogen production in women's ovaries. Okay, that's why you're 38
PCOS.
and you're not having your periods.
Right.
And your
Or they
estrogen
got
level is
the
barely
creases on
detectable.
their neck. You see that a lot
Yeah,
too. The acanthosis nigricans. You're like, I
yeah,
think you got
yeah,
PCOS. I bet you got
yeah.
a problem with your periods. I bet you got an
That's it.
estrogen problem. Yeah.
That's it. And so you can relay all these issues. So, or just a simple weight problem. It's just like, listen, insulin is the fat storage hormone. Type 1 diabetics, they don't make insulin. They cannot store fat. It doesn't make you eat 50,000 calories a day. They would not store an ounce of fat without insulin. And there's even an eating disorder in type 1 diabetics called diabulimia, where sometimes they would they just want to, like, get shredded for like a party or something like that, and they just don't take their insulin. But they eat whatever they want. They just don't take
Yeah.
insulin for a week, and they'll drop 20 pounds. Horrible idea. It's
Wow.
terrible for you. It's absolutely
Yeah.
awful and
But you
and
look good.
dangerous.
You feel like crap though.
But I know people that do it, and this came up, and on some of the things I saw in the comments, people were like, "Yeah, I don't know, understand why people have a problem. It's the easiest thing in the world to lose weight as a type 1 diabetic. Just stop taking your insulin. It's great. Just lose tons of
Yeah.
weight. Do whatever you want."
Fantastic.
And so that's insulin for you. You have an insulinoma, which is a tumor that secretes
Yeah.
massive amounts of insulin. They physically cannot lose weight. It doesn't matter what they eat. It doesn't matter if
Right.
they whatever they do. You
Right.
cannot lose weight
Has to
until
be
you
removed.
remove the insulinoma. That's it. And
Right.
so obviously that there's this strong hormonal response there. So, but insulin affects hundreds of different things. So you point that out, and you can argue it that way. Um, you
That's the big
going at it.
secret. That is the big secret. You just said the big secret of medicine. That's
Mm,
not what they want you to know. They
no, they
just
don't.
secret. No, don't let anyone know that insulin does anything more than just lower glucose. But what's sad
Yeah.
is that you still have. I mean, I saw it in the newspaper the other day. They were quoting an endocrinologist from a hospital and saying that insulin, diabetes is a low insulin problem. Like, you can't say that. You just cannot say that. That's a crime,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
ADA is pushing that narrative. They
Mm,
keep pushing it. They will always push it, and this is never going to get to med school.
no.
When
Yeah.
okay, why not? Like,
Yeah.
how would you
There's no
feel?
money.
Like, do you deal with students? Like, do you like, hey, I got to tell you something. This is really important. It's all wrong. It's like, it's
They.
focus on insulin.
Yeah.
You'd
They.
ruin their medical education by telling them that. I'm sure.
There are a lot of students that have reached out to me, and people I talk to, and it's just like they're interested. I mean, especially when you're a student, you're just like, wow, this whole new world opened up, and they're just trying to learn as much as they can, and then they
Right.
see like how crazy this is, and they're like, wow, that's really interesting, because no one taught
Yeah.
me all the studies about ketogenics,
Yeah.
and I took biochemistry. I mean, I have my earlier degrees to build off of, but I didn't, I wasn't taught this in medical school. Medical school is like the worst for teaching biochemistry. This is like, absolutely just grade school levels
Right.
of biochemistry that they teach. Is so
Memorizing.
superficial.
Right.
And it's just like, yeah, it's just so superficial.
How does
Um,
this relate? What is this? Why am I memorizing? What does this mean? Like, they
yeah.
never talked about insulin.
Oh,
They
well,
didn't
but
talk about endocrinology.
yeah. Well, all those pathways and things like that were just to show you what this pathway was, to say like, oh, and this is how calcium channel blockers work, because they go through here and they do this thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
they're only
But
the only
why?
biochemistry they're teaching you is the pharmacology, the
Right.
pharmacological biochemistry.
Right.
You
Right.
need to sound smart. You need to have this, paper veneer of being
Memorize.
educated. And so you can
Mhm.
talk, well, because this goes to this process and hits this and this and this and this and this and this. And people are like, my goodness, this guy is just
Right.
just really
So
aware of
smart.
how the
Yeah.
body works. Like that's the only mechanism they know in that
Yeah.
pathway. They just understand how
Right.
drug X works in this system
Right.
a couple steps down the chain, and that's it. They don't know
But
how
never.
anything else
Right.
comes together.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
why. Why does this person have this condition in the first place? How did this happen?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, they
Like,
don't know any of that.
why didn't I think like, okay, ACE inhibitors and ARBs, like the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, like, okay, memorize it. Okay, but why does this only work so great for diabetics? Like,
Hmm.
what's the mechanism here? I think a really good book is Ben Bikman's book, Why We Get Sick.
That's a great
I
book. Yeah.
Yeah, a really good book. I mean, I think they should teach this in med school, but like here's all the mechanisms. I love the details of the mechanisms, the how insulin causes all these various chronic disease conditions that we're just dismissing as genetic, really? You
Hmm.
know? Like
Yeah. It just,
why aren't we looking at root cause?
yeah. Well, we
But
know it's not genetic. I mean, because our genes haven't changed, and you cannot change your population wide genetics in one
oh,
generation in people's own lifetime. Like you're healthy here, and then like as you get going, you just get more and more sick, and it's just like, well, but that was genetic. You're gonna have that anyway,
right.
and
Lifestyle never comes up. It's always like,
yeah,
oh, I was exposed to a toxin. I must have got
mm,
some glyphosate I didn't know about. It's an environmental exposure thing. It's like,
yeah,
well, why don't you like think about and work on the one thing that you have control over, that
yeah,
you should feel empowered to change, and that is your lifestyle. But like, what is the right lifestyle? What is the right diet? If you listen
yeah,
to what they're telling, it's a balanced diet. You got
yeah,
to
whatever that
balance.
means.
You
Yeah,
know,
balance of nutrients and balance of poison. Yeah, it's perfectly
yeah.
balanced.
Well, I'm going to balance my fat and my protein for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, balanced diet, really what it's supposed to mean is that you have the correct balance of essential nutrients, vitamins, minerals, proteins, and fats that you have to
Not
have in
macros.
the right balance, right? Because you do need it,
Right.
because you don't just need
Yes.
X amount of grams of protein. So you can get a complete protein from plants. That's certainly fine. It's not in the right balance. They're not in the right proportions with
Very
each other. And
difficult.
that and that doesn't work very well. I mean, yeah, these things weren't talked about. Like diet and lifestyle were not really talked about, except that meat's bad, fat's bad, cholesterol's bad. That was the only sort of thing that we
Eat
got.
less, move
And
more, count
yeah,
calories, go to the gym. Just bullshit
that's sort of
answers.
well, they didn't even say that. It just gets solidified in whatever your preconceived notions were when you go into medical school. Unless you were taught something explicit to do with that, you come out
Nothing
thinking that
changed.
you would learn that in medical school, and because I'm a doctor now, this is what it is. This is like, were you taught that in medical school? Was there any
Yeah.
research behind it, or was that your prejudices since you were 7, and that's what your
Yeah.
daddy taught you, and so that's what you're just going to push out? And now you're a medical expert, and so it's all official. And because they're used to speaking in such an authoritative fashion, they
Uh,
speak authoritatively about things that they absolutely know nothing about, and there's like just um,
that
no evidence
inertia,
behind.
that
Yeah,
inertia, and that attitude is really hurting a lot of people because
yeah.
you're getting students to come to you. It is very difficult to convince a physician that patient education is where it's at. I was working in a diabetes clinic and I would do these rants, right? And I
Mhm.
remember working with this physician. He's like, he would let me talk to the patient for 20 minutes. And he
Mhm.
finally was like, you know what? I'm going to hang out and listen to what you say. I'm like, okay, cool.
Mhm.
And before you know, he's like, can I get a CGM too? Because in 3
Mhm.
months time, everyone's leaving the clinic. They've lost 20 pounds. They're no longer diabetic. You might as well have a gong. Like,
Mhm.
bang, like, hey, so-and-so's off insulin. Hey, fantastic. It's working, right? So they're no longer needed in the clinic. And he's like, we're graduating like 90% of our patients from our clinic.
That's amazing.
You know,
Yeah.
this is working. Whatever you do, keep. And we were giving away these CGMs, but it wasn't. I'm like, can we do more of this? Can we support more of this? And he's like, well, it would work great under value-based medicine, but we're not doing value-based medicine, Kyle, so we don't get any reimbursement. Like, okay, well, where's the money in prevention? Why isn't there money in prevention? And all I
Yeah.
could think to myself is like, you know what? This information is valuable. I'm not going to give up on my quest to know and learn more. It's going to have to pay someday. It's helping my life. It's helping the lives of those around me that I'm interacting with. How much more change do you think that we're going to experience before everybody starts understanding, hey, we've got a problem with insulin here. We've got a problem with our carbohydrate intake. We got a problem with mitochondrial toxins. And if something's a mitochondrial toxin, let's identify it, let's pinpoint it, and don't leave out stuff like alcohol. Don't leave the stuff that you like out. You need to list all of the mitochondrial toxins so people really know what to avoid. I don't know. It just seems obvious, but I think knowledge is really empowering. Like when I was like, oh man, I really like to have a glass of wine. Oh, wow. Do I really know what it's doing to me? And I feel like, okay, do I have informed consent about what I'm doing? I'm going to have to do the research and figure it out for myself. Okay, the informed consent is ethanol is a mitochondrial toxin. All right, it's going to do this, this, and this. And I can measure it with my Oura ring here. I know what it's going to do. I can see it in a graph. I can see how it affects my sleep. Right now, I feel like I'm informed. Now I feel like, okay, now I can make an informed choice and go, I'm going to pass on that toxin today, because it's for whatever reason, but at least I know. I want people to know and make your own informed choice, right? That's what we're talking about with vaccines and parents. Like, I think you need to be informed about your lifestyle choices and how they're affecting you. If you don't measure, you can't manage it. You don't know what's going on. We don't know what's going on. And I can't wait for the day for these continuous glucose monitors to be maybe on that.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if we knew more data. Imagine if we could do more with that data and understand it.
I've seen people completely control their diabetes. They had, using the blunt instrument of HbA1c. They had an HbA1c of over 13, right? So this is massively elevated. They got a CGM and they saw this like, oh, that's a spike. Okay, I'm not eating that. Oh, that's a spike. That's a spike. And they just sort of steered themselves into a very meat-based, high-fat approach with much less carbs and things like that. So it was just a meat predominant ketogenic diet, and they were able to get their HbA1c down into the 5s and then into the 4s just by doing this
and fast, really quick, huh? Super quick.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're like, how did you go from like 13 down into like 6? I'm like, okay, so all those red blood cells that were responsible for your A1C of 13, those all they got recycled and they're dead. All the new ones have little exposure to any glucose whatsoever. I'm like, yeah, you can see complete reversal in 3 months. 90,
that's pretty crazy.
10 weeks. Like, wow, what the heck happened? And I know that's what they were doing in the Verta Health study. They had massive improvements in 10 weeks.
Yeah.
Over 50% reverse their diabetes.
Yeah, which is amazing, and the thing is that this isn't really taught in medical school, that diet and lifestyle plays this big role, but it is in genetics. I mean, like I thankfully had an actual educate. This is sort of the problem with doing medical school as an undergraduate sort of degree. That most of the rest of the world has an undergraduate degree program. They have no education to speak of. They got a high school education. Sure. And then they went to a trade school. Medical school is a trade school. Law school is a trade school. You are learning a trade. You're learning how to do a job, and it's supposedly a scientifically based trade, but it is a trade. Like let's not confuse the issue.
I consider mine like an infomercial, a very expensive long infomercial. Like, okay, this is how this stuff works.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I thought like, oh, this is so useless.
Yeah.
It's like, this really didn't help. I learned more outside of my pharmacy school than I did in it. Stuff that I went to pharmacy school because I really wanted to be like a clinical pharmacist working in a hospital. And that's how I got my experience. Like, I love critical care. I love infectious disease. I can see like cause and effect. It's perfect. But when you start looking at like chronic disease, and here you are, a pharmacist dispensing a drug that doesn't help, right? How many patients have I had at the counter and I'm like, here's your Lipitor prescription, here's your atorvastatin, your cholesterol lowering med, as they're slurring their speech, and I think that they've had a stroke. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, are you always like this? Is this how you normally? This is like, do
Mm-hmm.
you have difficulties with brain fog and getting the words out? Oh yeah. And the muscle aches. My doctor just said it was just normal aging. I'm like, no, this could be the medication that you're on. You need to really evaluate this a little bit more carefully, right? Here I am dispensing something that I know is not healthy, especially for a woman. Women, why
Mm-hmm.
did they get thrown in with the group of men when it comes to cholesterol lowering? Like, come on. So it's been difficult because you're a pharmacist. You're all about chronic disease and trying to help people with chronic disease. I'm thinking that the doctor and the patient have had these long conversations about their chronic disease or condition and how it affects them. I didn't realize that they're only spending just a few minutes, like 3 or 4 minutes, and you're out the door and it's rush, rush, rush. And the time that like here's your lab, a year apart, and you're going to do some sort of intervention during that 1 year time span. This is not enough. I mean, you need more data. You need data like next month. You need to see if what you're doing is having an impact and moving things in the right direction. And that's kind of where I feel like if we can make interventions like with the continuous glucose monitor, you can make interventions and you're going to see an outcome within like a week. Hey, if I do a ketogenic fasting diet and I get my ketones up and my glucose down, yeah, you're going to feel amazing after a short period of time. Once you get off sugar, right? If you're addicted to sugar, but once you get off that, I'm going to see your data. Your ketones are going to go up. Your glucose is going to go down. Your variability is going to start flattening out. Nothing flattens out a glucose like meat, carnivore. It doesn't bounce much at all. Like, man, I don't think we're really designed to have a glucose much above 90. Like
No,
when
probably not.
you're
Yeah.
always in a mild state of ketosis.
Yeah.
You know,
Should
but when
be. I
people
think.
realize that and they see what that looks like on their graph, they're like, okay, I'm not going to eat these foods. I'm going to keep my ketones up. I got somebody looking over my shoulder. He's going to say good job or, do better or something like that. There's some accountability, right? But I'm
Mm,
saying that we have the science and the technology to be able to make changes and adopt those changes and see those benefits within a short period of time, not a year, not the year out. Like, I think
mm,
that's ridiculous. You that's not managing anybody. They're just managing disease and symptoms and just adding more meds. Oh, you got this problem. There's 4 more meds. What average person's on 3 different blood pressure meds, right?
mm.
We got 3 different mechanisms rolling,
Yeah.
diuretic, typically maybe a beta blocker, an ACE inhibitor, or an ARB. Like, that's what everybody ends up. That's just going to be the progressive disease for your hypertension that's caused by your lifestyle.
Mm.
Holy crap, why aren't we drawing insulin levels? Why aren't we making the connection between hyperinsulinemia and cardiovascular disease? When's that going to happen? When is the AHA and the ADA going to get out of the way?
Yeah. Well, even with genetic, I mean, let's say things are genetic. Like they don't talk
Mm,
about this in medical school much, but because I had an actual undergraduate degree and I actually had an education, I didn't just go to a trade school. I took genetics. I had a whole year of genetics, and we talked about this. It's called penetrance, right? So you have a genetic, you have a genetic um, predisposition for something, and then you have, like, with identical twins, you have one of those twins has this expression as a phenotype for this genetic variation. The other twin has that same genetic variation, but
right,
only 60% of the time they also get the phenotypical expression of that
right,
of that genetic disorder. So that's penetrance. So there's a 60% penetrance, right, in the case of that example. And so, it's like, well, yes, there's a genetic, you know,
component,
predisposition and
right,
an
right.
environmental trigger. And if you don't have the genetic predisposition, doesn't matter if you get exposed to the trigger, you're not going to get the problem. And
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have the genetic, and if you do have the genetics but you don't get the trigger, you won't get the problem. So, that's just a well understood mechanism. Now there are things that are entirely environmental, and there's some things that you may have a genetic predisposition that will make you more susceptible to that
Mm-hmm.
environmental exposure, toxin, whatever. But that's sort of the relationship. You're just saying, no, it's 100% genetic. There are very, very few things that are 100%
Right.
genetic. when we're talking about the complexity of health and the chronic disease that's just increasing. You can't just say, oh, genetic, just unilateral, it's just binary. You have it or you don't. That
Right.
doesn't make sense, especially for like the obesity thing. If obesity was just genetic, if we were just like hippos, we would all look like hippos, and that wouldn't be obese. That would just
Right.
be normal. We would look normal.
We'd be
To a
herbivores.
chimpanzee, yeah, exactly. And to a chimpanzee, you ever seen one of those guys that like chimpanzees that have like alopecia? They've got like 1% body fat. They are just
I know
shredded,
that shredded
right?
3%. I know that's
Yeah,
look
it's
at
like
us
it's
at
yeah. So they look
40%.
at us. Oh my god, yeah. Well, but they might look at us at like 6%, 10%, and be like, God, what a bunch of hippos, just fat asses, And we look at a hippo going like, what? But that's their natural state, right? And so
Right.
you don't have hippos that are just bloated, obese tubs for a hippo. They still
Right.
stay in this
The
this sort of
same. Right. If you draw a hippo, they all look the same. Same thing with a cow. They
yeah.
all look the same. There isn't like fat ones. There isn't fat lions. There isn't fat
No.
carnivores. Right.
And
Like
unless they're being fed something they're
the
not
wrong.
supposed to eat.
Right.
And so same with us. And so if that were the case, we should have the same sort of range of fat body fat percentage going
Hmm.
back since as
Right.
long as we had records, right? And so
Right.
then why is it that so the obesity rate would never go up? Right? It would
Right.
just be there. So,
Constant.
you have, people in the
That's what I.
80s or, 70s, really, the obesity rate in America was about 8%. After World War
Mhm.
II, it was about 6%. And in what, 1910, 1920, it was like 1.3%.
Yeah.
So it was much smaller, historically. And they say, okay, well, 100 years ago, sure, maybe there were famines, maybe people were poor, they couldn't get enough to eat, and so they were
Right.
skinnier. Well, now the bottom quintile, the poorest people on welfare and food stamps, they're actually more obese than the rest of the population. Okay, so what
Yeah.
happened there? And now there's people saying like, well, if you want to address obesity, then address something that really has something to do with it, like socioeconomic standards and money redistribution. It's like, no, like
Right.
because you're poor doesn't make you fat, doesn't make you obese. It's that
Right.
you're on government food stamps and you're being fed a whole bunch of processed junk food
Yeah.
and garbage. And
Yeah.
the
Gary
Coca-Cola and then
Tobbs. Gary Tobbs brought that up, and he's like, in I think good calories, bad calories. He talked about the women of
Mhm,
Tobago, like 1,200 calories, and they were
mhm,
obese, and their children were malnourished.
yeah,
Their babies were extremely small. How in the
yeah,
world could somebody that big? Well, if it's a calorie thing, right? I love how he
yeah,
does the essentially Aboriginal groups, when you move them to
mhm,
another location, they get fat immediately. They get sick. They get hypertensive.
mhm,
Like that's not genetics. That can't be genetics. But
mhm,
epigenetics is what you're talking about, essentially, correct? Would you say like protection of your genetic material requires energy,
mhm,
and in order to keep that DNA nice and covered, basically
mhm,
from mutations and protected,
mhm,
you need energy to protect that. You need to fix the mutations because this is constantly happening in cells. So in order to protect it, you need energy. And if the mitochondria is damaged, you can't have that protection. And I think this is something that Thomas Seyfried talks about, where like, hey, if you can't protect your DNA, you do have the risk of mutations. You do run the risk of developing cancer, not just
yeah,
because of the hypoxia, but you've got a constant assault of the DNA, typically from mitochondria that's exploding because of the ROS basically is flying everywhere. The
mhm,
little bullets are just ripping through everything. You
yeah,
need energy to protect. And if you don't have that energy, it's seed or soil, right?
yeah,
What disease is going to show up when you don't have the mitochondria to
mhm,
protect your body, your genetic material from going haywire?
yeah. Well, and so that's the thing, I mean, there are certain, so there's certain sort of innate sort of issues with DNA coding and so on, and and replicating and things like that, and things can get problems. But the majority of the damage that comes is from external forces. We're eating things that can directly damage our DNA. When you damage your mitochondria, they'll shoot off these these reactive oxygen species, cause oxidative stress, and that directly damages the DNA as well. And so, I think I think mitochondria are much more important than the DNA. DNA is like the blueprints, but it's not like a mind. The
It's not doing
mitochondria
anything; it's just sitting there.
Yeah, the mitochondria actually going around doing things, moving things, and using those blueprints to build the building, to run run the facility, right? So those are the blueprints, those are the documents, that's the information, and then we can use that, and those are all the the lasts and the prints for all the different things that we're manufacturing. But it's the mitochondria going around doing that, and so that's very important, very, very important. But it's not the end all be all. I mean, it's all is working as a unit, and you start breaking down that unit, and it starts to cause very serious problems. I was just going to say too, I have another meeting starting in about 4 minutes. Just so you know.
Yeah. I don't want to go into this next one. We were talking about. You were talking about. I think I don't know if it's you or somebody else. We're talking about the mitochondria haploids, where they like where the origin of the mitochondria is, and its DNA that we carry from. I think it's maternal, right? Maternal DNA of mitochondria.
Well, for the mitochondria
kind of trace back to Africa, right?
Yeah. So the mitochondria themselves, but the thing is that we actually store a lot of the original mitochondrial DNA in our DNA, and so you actually do get source materials for those mitochondria in DNA in the nucleus, but certainly the mitochondria themselves, we get those from our mother.
Yeah, that's cool. I think it's fascinating. Like here is the origin of humanity. Like this is where these mitochondria, this is where all this DNA material went, right? And here you are, right? It's just I don't know. I love the topic of evolution. I wanted to get into it deeper with you, but no, this was really good. I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about.
No problem.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much.